we're going to be reading chapter 6 today of The Mouse and the Motorcycle. Last chapter, in chapter 5, we left off where Keith's mother swears that she saw a mouse ride a motorcycle under the bed, and everyone's trying to convince her that she's crazy. And right now Ralph is hiding up Keith's pajama sleeves. So here we go, chapter 6. It's called Peanut Butter Sandwich. I told you to be careful, scolded Keith when his parents had gone to dress, and Ralph had crawled down his arm into his hand. It wasn't my fault. The door blew shut. Ralph jumped from his hand to the bedspread. Though Keith was a friendly boy, even a generous one, Ralph did not like this feel of skin against his paws. It must be terrible to go through life without having fur, and such a nuisance having to wear clothes that had to be washed and drip dried all the time. Ralph knew all about drip drying. Many were the drops of water from shirts and slips that he had to dodge going in and out of his mouse hole. You didn't have to stay out so long, Keith pointed out as he began to get dressed. What's the use of having a motorcycle if you can't go tearing around and stay out late? Ralph said reasonably. You don't have a motorcycle. I let you use mine, and you better be careful. I like that motorcycle, and I don't want anything to happen to it. Yeah, I'll take care of it, I promise, somewhat being sarcastic. I don't want anything to happen to it either, you know. It's going to be harder to get a chance to ride now that my mom's seen you, said Keith. She's a terribly good housekeeper, and she's sure to complain to management. Speaking of breakfast, you people are too tidy around here, Ralph complained. I'm not getting enough crumbs. You don't leave any crumbs for me. Oh, I never thought about that, said Keith. Do you want something to eat? Ralph was astonished. This was the first time in his life anyone had ever asked him if he wanted something to eat. It's always been a question of what he could get his paws on. You mean I have a choice? He asked. Sure. All I have to do is order it in when I go to breakfast, and then I'll just bring you some. Ralph had to take time to think for a second. After a diet of graham crackers left by little kids, or bits of candy, the occasional peanut or an apple core, or maybe some toast crumbs or a little dab of jam left by an adult, left by room service, the possibility of getting to choose his own meal was almost too much. I know what I'd like, said Ralph, but I don't know what it's called. Once some people who were staying here who had no money, they had 4 children, and all of them were so hungry, and they couldn't afford to go to the dining room in the restaurant. So they just bought some bread and spread some stuff on it from a brown jar. And then they put another piece of bread on top of that. They whispered all the time when they were eating because they didn't want the maids or the bellboy to know they were having food in their room. Afterwards, they got on their hands and knees and picked up every single crumb off the carpet so no one knew they had been eating in their rooms. It was a great disappointment. It smelled so good, though, like peanuts, but better. The boy laughed. Yeah, that's a peanut butter sandwich. Sure, I can bring you that. I'll eat part of it myself. It'll be kind of a funny thing to order for breakfast, but I don't mind. Where are you going to leave it? Asked Ralph. He thought for a moment. Where do you live? Well, in that knothole under the window. No kidding. I poked my finger through there last night. I'll say you did, said Ralph. You scared me half to death. Nobody's ever guessed the mouse hole was in that knothole. Guess I'll tell you what, said Keith. I'll bring up part of a peanut butter sandwich and poke it through the hole. Just like room service, Ralph thought. I could not be more pleased. What about the motorcycle? Where are you going to leave that? Well, in my suitcase, I guess. Oh, come on. Have a heart. Come on, leave it somewhere that I can look at it during the day. You're supposed to be in your mouse hole, sleeping, not riding around in the daylight where people can see you. Well, gee whiz, can a fellow even just look at the motorcycle? I bet you like to look at a motorcycle. Yes, I do. Well, I'll leave it back under the bed, like I said. But you promise not to ride until dark time? Scout's honor. Ralph jumped off the bed and ran to the knothole. Ralph's home was furnished with a clutter of things people had dropped on the floor. Pieces of Kleenex, hair, little pieces of twine. His mom was always planning to straighten things out, but she never got around to it. She was always too busy fussing and worrying. Now as Ralph expected, she was dividing Rice crumbs among his squeaky little bunches of brothers and sisters. Well, she waited to scold him. Ralph, if I have told you once, I have told you 1,000 times, she began. Guess what? He interrupted her. Somebody in room 215 is going to bring us a real peanut butter sandwich. Ralph, cried his frightened mother, you haven't been associating with people, have you? Oh, he's just a boy, Ralph said, trying to leave out the part of the dangers and the glories of his night. He won't hurt us. He likes mice. But he is a person, said his mother. That doesn't mean he has to be bad. Just like Pop said, people shouldn't say all mice are timid, because they aren't. Just the same, Ralph, said his mother, I do wish you were more careful with whom you associate. I am so afraid you will fall with the wrong crowd of friends. I'm growing up, said Ralph. I'm getting too old to hang around the mouse nest all the time. I want to go out and see the world. I want to go to the ground floor, see the kitchen, the dining room, the storeroom, the garbage cans out back. Oh, Ralph, not the ground floor, not all the way down there. You aren't old enough. Yes, I am. There's no telling what you might run into down there. A mousetrap, a cat, poison. Why, out in the garbage cans, you might even see an owl. I don't care. Someday I'm going downstairs. But think of the owls, Ralph, said his mother. We moved into this hotel because of the owls. It was after your Uncle Leroy disappeared, and all that was found was his bones. The mother mouse pleaded and was interrupted by the sound of Keith returning to room 215. Now you'll see, said Ralph to his mom. Sure enough, Keith came to the knothole. Psst, here it is. The waitress thought I was crazy ordering a peanut butter sandwich and cornflakes for breakfast. He stuffed half the sandwich in through the hole. It was the size of Ralph. Listen, we're going to be gone most of the day. The dining room is packing us a lunch, and we're going to drive along the back roads and see some old mining towns. Thanks, said Ralph. Have fun. See you tonight, said Keith, and have a good sleep. Ralph's mother could not help being impressed by the sight of this sandwich. Just like room service. Why, it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and it even has butter in it. I told you he'd bring it for us. Ralph couldn't help boasting with a mouthful. After sharing his feast with his squeaky little brothers and sisters, all of whom had trouble eating, the peanut butter kept sticking to their teeth, Ralph curled up in a heaping shred of Kleenex and took a long nap. When he woke refreshed, his first thought was of the motorcycle. He wondered if Keith really had remembered to leave it under the bed. He yawned and stretched and left by the way of the knothole. Room 215 was just as Ralph had seen it last. The bed was not made. There was no fresh towels. Ralph ducked under the sheets and the blankets that had tumbled off to one side, and there was a dim light. He caught a sight of the exhaust pipes on the motorcycle. Keith had trusted him after all. He walked across the carpet, took hold of the handle grips one more time. They felt right in his paws. He longed to be off, speeding down the carpet. But he promised, and a promise was a promise. Keith had kept his promise about the peanut butter sandwich. Ralph would not be riding the motorcycle in the daytime. He tried to satisfy himself by walking around the motorcycle. He admired all of its sleek designs. Ralph was lost in admiration and daydreams of speed and power when suddenly the door opened and the maid entered. It was too late to make a dash for the mouse hole, and the maid stripped the blankets and sheets off the bed, and light came beaming in on Ralph and the motorcycle. Her feet in white sneakers moved lightly as she gathered up all the sheets and pillowcases and dropped them off into the open door. Next thing Ralph knew, he was hearing a familiar, dreaded footsteps coming down the hall. Steps he had learned to fear when he was a tiny mouse. It was the head housekeeper, the woman who was in charge of all the maids in the hotel. He recognized her steps, and he recognized her shoes. Sensible black shoes. Nothing was ever clean enough for the head housekeeper, and Ralph's whole family lived in dread of her. Now he held his breath, hoping she would just keep going down the hallway, but nope, she stepped into room 215. Good morning, Marjorie, the house cleaner spoke crisply to the maid. Be sure to clean 215 and 216 very thoroughly this morning. There has been complaints from the guests. They are suspecting mice. Yes, ma'am, said the maid. Looking behind the drawer, continued the housekeeper. keeper. In all the corners of the closet, please report any evidence you see of mice, and be sure to vacuum under the bed today. You've been getting a little careless lately." With that, she walked down the hall. "Old grouch," muttered the maid as she reached into the hall for something that produced the sound of struck terror to Ralph's heart. It was the clang of the vacuum cleaner attachments banging together. And that's the end of chapter 6.